Now to our morning headlines. And lawmakers are going to waste little time getting to work after being sworn into office later this morning at the opening of the state legislature.
Hearings on the state budget have already been scheduled in what's expected to be a busy session for elected officials. KITV4's Ryan Kalei-Suji joins us live at the state capitol with a preview of this opening day. Ryan?
Hey, Jella Mahia, that's right. We're here at the state capitol where later today lawmakers will be officially sworn into office. And there's a lot of hot button issues that are expected to be discussed at this legislative session. I'm joined this morning by our very own KITV political analyst, Neil Milner. And Neil, we want to talk about, earlier we were talking about the change in leadership in both the House and Senate. Do you think that change in leadership is going to affect policy at all than what we've seen in previous administrations in previous years?
Well, it's all been a little vague so far. Most of what we know has been about the internal politics of the legislature, of the House, and that becomes important to the rest of us when it affects policy. And I think there's a couple of places that it might, and I say might because we don't know. One has to do with the Pacific Land Development Corporation, land development, where it appears as if the dissidents may be more likely to be critical of that legislation that was passed. And the second has to do with transparency. It has to do with the way that the legislature handles bills and gives notice to the public, and the dissidents may be more open to change there.
And of course, we're talking about Joe Souki potentially being, or all eyes looking to him taking over the reins as Speaker. He's a supporter in the past of gambling. Could we see that potentially coming up once again this legislative session?
Well, he's been pretty guarded about that. Gambling always comes up because you always have some very powerful lobbying interests with lobbying that are ready there. So it will certainly come up. It comes up all the time. You get the same kind of speeches, whether there's going to be an opening or not. Souki's been very careful to say he's not going to use his position to push it. But gambling never goes away.
Right. And, it's interesting because over the course of these opening sessions, we've seen some demonstrations kind of develop over time. And there's a few that are scheduled for today. Do you know any of those that are coming on today, and how do you think that will impact the session?
Well, you never know how they're going to impact the session. They're starting off in areas that, in fact, people are not really very well aware of, at least the public generally. One has to do with agricultural and genetic crops, and the other has to do with a combination of that and native rights. But the purpose of these kinds of demonstrations is to make public aware. So you have that, and you have the great concern and the previous public jumping into the issue of the PLDC thing. So that may set a kind of a tone, but there's nothing that's going to make the legislature jump right away. It's essentially saying we're going to be out there and we're going to be doing some things to try to get the legislature interested.
We were talking about earlier of the momentum of issues like gay marriage and legalization of marijuana that is gaining momentum throughout the country. Do you see that impacting or affecting policy here in Hawaii and that becoming an issue this session?
I don't think it's going to become an issue this session. The gay marriage is more or less, I say more or less, settled here for a while at least. And I don't think the marijuana issue has the movement. There's so many other important issues that the legislature is concerned about. The early education that's going to cost a lot of money, unfunded liability, those sorts of things. The terrible infrastructure, computer infrastructure that we have in the state, which is like paper and pencil stuff. It's like a grocery bag writing on the back of the grocery bag. It almost is that bad. All of these things are going to occupy, and unfunded liability. So it takes an extra push, I think, extra lobbying, extra interest groups to get these things moving, say on marijuana, and I don't think it's there right now.
And, one final question. We've seen an increase in the tourism numbers, and that's ultimately impacted the state budget. And there's a little bit more cushion this year. What do you think that will impact that will have, being that the budget necessarily is not as tight as we've seen in years past?
Well, it changes because it changes the questions. It changes the challenges a little bit because it raises two questions to the forefront a little bit more. One of which is, how much money should we put away for the rainy day, literally the rainy day fund? And the other has to do with how do we now go back and tighten the safety net that we have made loose. So it's just a different set of challenges. And of course, you never have enough money, but it isn't as dire as it has been in the past.
Well, Neil, thank you so much for joining us. And again, the state legislature gets underway officially today as lawmakers get sworn into office on the 27th, the beginning of the 27th legislative session. Back to you guys in the studio.
Ryan, thank you for that live report.